Within the span of 14 verses, the 7th chapter of Amos presents a staggering theological contradiction. It begins in verse 3 with a God who relented from sending a plague, and ends in verse 17 with a multi-generational curse of prostitution and slaughter. In the first half of the chapter, we see a God of profound mercy, one who prepares a devastating punishment only to withdraw it at the prophet's request. Yet this same chapter concludes with a cold, absolute sentence against the family of a priest, offering no path for intercession or escape. These conflicting snapshots are actually part of a sophisticated ancient Near Eastern oral structure designed to organize the prophet's experience. This structure, known as a paneled narrative, functions as a psychological trap designed to systematically reorient the listener's perspective. Over the course of 3 visions, the architecture shifts his empathy, aligning him with the judge. To understand the theology of Amos is to understand this ancient literary engineering, the only way to reconcile God's immense patience with his inescapable verdict. In oral literature, the paneled structure follows an A-A-B sequence. Repetition builds tension before a definitive break in the third. In panel 1, Amos sees a locust swarm strip the land clean just as the late crops emerge. Amos reacts to this moving picture of catastrophe with immediate dread. He uses the Hebrew word salak, asking God to forgive a nation he describes as small and incapable of survival. God's response, to relent, demonstrates the conditional nature of prophetic warnings. But the second panel intensifies the pattern. Amos sees a cosmic fire so destructive it dries up the great deep and devours the land. Amos is so overwhelmed by the visual scale of the disaster that he drops the request for forgiveness and simply begs God to stop, using the verb chadal. Throughout these first 2 visions, Amos's perspective is entirely anchored to the suffering of the people. He is reacting to the horror of the punishment rather than the cause of the crime. God relents a second time, firmly establishing his posture of divine patience and his willingness to withhold judgment. These visions confirm God's patience, but they leave a critical problem unsolved. The averted disasters have done nothing to remove the rot of Israel's sin. In the third panel, the pattern breaks. There are no swarms or fire. The emotional catastrophe is replaced by a single, static image. The Lord stands beside a wall with a plumb line in his hand. Before Amos can beg for mercy, God asks him a direct question: "What do you see?" This question forces the prophet to look away from the subjective terror of punishment and focus on an objective, unyielding standard. The wall represents Israel. In the stillness of the vision, it is visibly crooked, warped so far beyond its original design that it can no longer support its own weight. The narrative has moved Amos from viewing the nation's survival as the priority to recognizing its failure to meet a basic structural standard. He is now seeing the wall through the eyes of the architect. Intercession is no longer an option. A wall that is out of plumb cannot be forgiven into being straight. It can only be dismantled. The third panel completes the sequence. Once the objective standard is revealed, conditional patience ends and judgment becomes a mechanical necessity. This visionary logic is immediately tested in the real world through a confrontation between Amos and Amaziah, the high priest of Bethel. Amaziah views Amos's message not as a divine warning, but as a political conspiracy. He sends word to the king that the land cannot bear Amos's words. Amaziah's defense of the status quo reveals the core of the problem. He commands Amos to stop prophesying because Bethel is the king's sanctuary. He has substituted the authority of God for the authority of the state. This institutionalized religion exists to serve the worshiper, King Jeroboam II, rather than the God who is supposedly being worshipped. Amos responds by rejecting the credentials of a professional religious guild. He is not a seer for hire, and he has no stake in the royal economy. He was a shepherd and a tender of sycamore fig trees, a blue-collar worker plucked from his agricultural life by a direct command from Yahweh. Amos prophesies because he has no alternative. He has heard the lion roar, and no royal decree can cancel an unmediated divine directive. Amaziah's attempt to silence the prophet to protect the king's sanctuary provides the real-world proof of the third vision. The nation's foundation is no longer true to plumb. Because the leadership has rejected the standard, the judgment transitions from a visionary threat to a brutal personal consequence for Amaziah's family. Verse 17 is difficult for modern readers because it violates our individualistic sense of justice. We instinctively recoil when a family suffers for the sins of a patriarch. In ancient Israel, the community was a unified network. Achan's individual theft at Jericho corrupted the nation, killing 36 soldiers. Similarly, King Saul's treaty violation caused a 3-year national famine, eventually costing 7 descendants their lives. Within this framework, a leader is not an isolated actor. He is the anchor for his household and his nation. When he fails, he compromises the integrity of the entire structure. The decree against Amaziah's family reflects this covenantal reality. By institutionalizing corruption, the priest has exposed his entire house to the looming threat of the Assyrian Empire. God is not micromanaging each sword stroke. He is removing his divine protection, allowing the Assyrian military to act according to its own brutal impulses. When a leader like Amaziah rejects the plumb line, he brings the blast radius of a fallen world down upon his entire network. Amos chapter 7 reveals a consistent internal logic regarding the divine character. It shows that God's default posture is profound patience, using terrifying visions as conditional warnings to encourage a change in the people. But when the leadership rejects the standard and silences the prophet to protect a corrupted institution, the structural failure becomes total. Once the plumb line proves the wall is crooked, empathy must align with the truth of the architect rather than the survival of the warped stones. By the time the third panel concludes, the narrative has re-engineered the audience's response, transforming a plea for mercy into a recognition of the verdict. In this framework, when the divine standard is absolute and the corruption is total, corporate judgment becomes an inescapable necessity.